Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another Axel 72 video. And in today's video, I'm going to be giving my prediction for the Dillian Whyte versus Moses Itauma and the whole kind of main card predictions. And so if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Like the video if you do indeed like the video, and feel free to join the Patreon as well. The link will be in the description. It really supports the channel, and you can request any kind of combat sporting related content, and I will try my best to get it out on the page. And there's been plenty of videos that have come as a result of that so far, and I really do appreciate all the members that are on there already. And yeah, like I say, the link will be in the description. Thank you very much. But let's get straight into this one. So obviously, it's a big event. It's an event in which is out in Saudi, and in general, I feel like this event perhaps could have been promoted a little bit better. I mean, obviously with Fight Week, the promotion has pushed it up a bit more, but I just feel like it hasn't been talked about, or like I say, really pushed a tremendous amount in the build up to Fight Week. And perhaps if this event was a UK show with the amount of UK names originally that was set to fight on this card, especially, or names in which English fans know, I feel like it could have sold really well, to be honest. I mean, Dillian Whyte is a name who's entertained British fans for years. Moses Itauma is the new British up and coming fighter who everybody's excited about. And then when you go through the card as well, I mean, Nick Ball is selling out arenas in Liverpool and is arguably the best British fighter around at the moment. Raymond was meant to fight Anthony Kakache. Kakache's just won on a big stage against Lee Wood in the UK. David Adeleye as well is another big, British heavyweight on the come up. So again, like I say, I felt like this had all the capabilities to be a big British headline show. I just feel like maybe there hasn't been a big Saudi show in recent times, so I think that was why they were wanting to do that, and maybe they are wanting to build a big fan base with Moses Itauma out in Saudi, because this is arguably his, real kind of big showcase show, with him, of course, headlining. But again, like I said, that was just something in which I wanted to talk about before I touched upon the fights. But I'll start off by talking about the main event in, of course, Dillian Whyte versus Moses Itauma. This fight is a surprising one. I didn't really expect that it was going to happen, and this fight, in my opinion, definitely would never have happened if His Excellency didn't get involved. I think Moses obviously has been on an amazing run and has been knocking out all these guys within the first or second round, but again, the guys at the levels of the names in which he's faced have been, increasingly getting better, but haven't been a world level of opponent yet. So for somebody like a Dillian Whyte, who, arguably could have got himself into a really good position to get a really great payday against somebody like an Anthony Joshua, it is surprising to see that he is willing to come back to face somebody who is such a risky opponent in somebody like a Moses Itauma, where realistically he might not get a tremendous amount to gain, even if he beats Moses, because of, people could just argue that it's too soon for Moses and he shouldn't have been in there in the first place and things like that. So again, like I say, I think just the money getting involved with the Saudi money and His Excellency really wanting to push and make a big thing of Moses Itauma is the reason as to why this fight has happened, and why Dillian Whyte has been put on this card. Again, maybe another reason why it's not in the UK is because I'm not entirely sure if Dillian Whyte is actually allowed to fight under the British Boxing Board at the moment, so that might be why it's not in the UK. But obviously, like I've touched upon, this perhaps might be too soon for Moses. I mean, it could be too soon for Moses. It could be Dillian Whyte, catching him when he's on the slide, because of course Whyte is 37 years of age. Perhaps he's not been on the best of performances recently. I mean, he's coming off a stoppage win against Ebenezer Tete, which, yes, he's had two stoppage wins in a row against Christian Hammer and Ebenezer Tete, but both of them fights aren't against names in which are good heavyweights at all, to be honest. I mean, Tete has just been more recently knocked out by Fraser Clark in the first round, and he also got knocked out by Daniel Dubois in the first round as well. So the fact that Dillian Whyte took him quite a few rounds and was putting in quite a sluggish performance was, not something in which realistically excited the fans out in Gibraltar and, made the UK fans really want to see him back again. But nonetheless, he's making this return at 37, and something, of course, everybody has been picking up upon is his, just the fact that he's in great shape and maybe the best of his career. I feel like he may be seeing this fight as a last kind of give it us all, and at the same time, he doesn't realistically want to get embarrassed by somebody who is so much, younger than him, because he obviously, if he gets knocked out, it is embarrassing for him. Getting knocked out by a 20-year-old isn't something that he's going to be wanting to do. Like I say, it's a risky fight for him to take. So again, that's probably why he's coming in such great shape. When he was fighting the likes of Tete and Hammer as well, he was coming in quite heavy and he looked sluggish, like I said, and it just didn't look like a good thing. And that's when, when the fight got announced against Itauma, people were thinking, it was going to be an easy night for Itauma because Whyte has been looking so sluggish and so, just overweight and things like that as well. But now that Whyte is coming in such great shape, it does shake things up a little bit, and I think the expectations might have changed a bit, and maybe people are expecting a bit of a rollback, kind of rolling back the years from Dillian Whyte, and this could be one of his best performances yet. I mean, when you look at some of his great wins, I mean, the Povetkin second one was a great win. The Chisora fight, especially in the second one, was a great win. The Brown fight was a great win. The Joseph Parker one was a great win, which of course has aged well as well. So, like I say, he's had plenty of wins and he's had plenty of great moments. All these things, all this experience, of course, which Moses Itauma hasn't had yet. Something I did want to quickly touch upon, which I won't talk about too much, but something in which has been kind of brushed under the carpet a little bit is with Dillian Whyte's drug testing. Like I say, that he did test positive against, well, in the build up to fighting Anthony Joshua. Then that fight didn't happen. Then not really a tremendous amount got talked of it, and it's seemingly been the case that he's tested positive a few times, and again that might be actually why he's not allowed to fight in the UK. So has he served a silent ban? Again, there wasn't really anything from what I've seen that's come out to say that he hasn't, that he didn't do it on purpose. Again, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, I'm happy to be proved wrong, but again, it's just an interesting topic of debate because if he's I'm sure he won't be getting away with it for this fight, but if we see a different version of him, perhaps some things might have been happening. I'm not entirely sure, but like I say, that has seemingly been kind of brushed under the carpet a bit, just to say. But to speak about both fighters individually as fighters, Dillian Whyte, he's somebody who is gonna continuously walk you down. He likes to let his hands go and inevitably try and beat you down, and I think that's how he's gotten most of his big performances and his big knockouts as well. Again, he stood toe to toe with Derek Chisora in that rematch, and everybody remembers that huge knockout that he ended up landing in the 11th round. So again, that was just continuously beating Chisora down and letting his hands go until inevitably the right shot game in which he just landed and put everything into, and of course was enough to be able to knock down and knock out Chisora, which is a hard thing to do. Not many fighters have been able to do that. He's imposing, he's strong, he's got big body shots, he changes levels nicely in his combinations. Again, I think all these things, all these attributes, alongside with the experience and, things like that, is just stuff in which Moses Itauma hasn't had to deal with in the professional ranks yet. He's relaxed, composed, tries to use his head movement at times, Dillian Whyte, which is, again, something a little bit different from what he's maybe, had to deal with again at Itauma. He's got good shot variation with that big uppercut as well. He'll slap the big shots to the body, which, maybe takes a bit of power out of him when he's slapping, but then he can come through with a big uppercut, which of course can land big. He lets his hands go, like I've talked about. He's aggressive. He uses that aggressiveness to up the pace, even if he's tired. Like I say, he can really dig his feet into the canvas and up that pace with just that, that energy of aggression coming through him. He can fight at a mid or an in close range, and of course he has that heart as well, which is something in which I'm sure hasn't gone. Negatives about him, I think he can be flat-footed and can react to feints, and Itauma does feint well and feints a lot, so again he might be catching him out with that. His speed is poorer, he does slow down throughout fight as well, and becomes a bit more of a slugger, and like I say, wants to plant his feet and just slug it out. He's been hurt badly, of course. Everybody remembers that huge uppercut that Povetkin landed on him. He can have clumsy footwork going backwards and an awkward jab, which yes, can kind of blind opponents a little bit and, like I say, just get in the way a bit, but I don't really think it actually gets through the guard that often and actually causes a tremendous amount of problems. He does square up and he can be made to miss wildly, and that's where Itauma's movement might be able to frustrate Dillian Whyte. He lowers his guard, he doesn't always capitalise when he actually finds moments of success. In his last fight against Tete, he was rolling off a bit and then trying to circle off and doing the right thing there, creating that angle, but then he wasn't really capitalising upon it to be able to get that stoppage a bit earlier on. And I feel like he does have that less one punch KO power. Again, I'd be happy to be proved wrong, but just in his more recent contests, yes, he's had 2 stoppages back to back, but they haven't really been brutal knockouts realistically. And again, the level of opposition. And then before that, Jermaine Franklin, he went to a decision with. So again, I feel like it has just been a little while since we've seen a big one punch knockout from Dillian Whyte. I don't think like he is the most powerful of heavyweights, and I feel like Itauma, of course, has that hype behind him with the knockouts in which he's been getting. To speak more about Itauma, he's got the fast hands and feet. He's explosive, he's got one punch KO power, he's sharp, accurate, feints well, he'll go down and then up with the feints very nicely, and he's got good timing, reactive, sets up his shots well. All these things which you kind of talk about the likes of an Alexander Usyk to have realistically. Not many heavyweights that you really see, especially on the big stage, realistically have these in their arsenal. He can fight in and out, he's well disciplined, he doesn't seem to rush his work, and he'll lead off his jab exceptionally realistically, and he's very composed. Times you coming in, again, he's been able to knock out plenty of opponents, especially in recent times. His past 2 fights when he has taken that bit more of a step up against Balogun, he was able to time him on multiple occasions to get really big knockouts, and then same with Dempsey McKean as well. He can fight at a mid-range, probably I would say at the best, and he can fight on the front foot or the back foot. Negatives, I mean, it's difficult to say. Of course, there has been just such few rounds in which we've seen him in at the kind of higher of levels, and obviously he's got the pressure on him. That's not really a negative, but it is going to be still, that exceptional amount of pressure upon him. He's not had to go the distance, and he may start to force the fight or could even get drawn into a fight if he has to go in the distance, and he may even tire a little bit as well. Of course, that his way of fighting is a very demanding way of fighting. You have to have really good stamina and work rate, and again, if he can't knock out Dillian Whyte, then he may begin to tire. I feel like he does go back in straight lines a bit at times. I don't think he has faced that adversity, of course. He's not as physical, and I do believe he does drop his hands most, often due to confidence, which of course is where he could perhaps get caught with a big shot from Dillian Whyte if Dillian, of course, is putting them all is, if he catches him with a shot like he caught Derek Chisora with. Who do I think is going to win? I think that Moses Itauma is going to win, but I'm going to say via unanimous decision. Maybe that's a controversial thing to say, but I just believe that Dillian Whyte is going to come into this one more fired than ever, really wanting to prove a point, not wanting to get just brutally swept aside and knocked out. I don't think he's going to be able to do enough to be able to stop Itauma, because I think Itauma is going to be able to pick up the early rounds quite convincingly. I think his jab is going to be having a lot of success. Maybe in the later rounds again, he might get drawn into a bit of a firefight, but I think it is going to be an entertaining contest. But I think Itauma is going to be disciplined enough to be able to fight his own fight, which I do think will be enough for him to get the win. But like I say, a decision. I think maybe there might be a knockdown in there from either side, but I think inevitably, like I say, an Itauma decision is what I'm going to go for, which, again, like I say, might be controversial because a lot of people are going for, an Itauma early knockout. But again, just the way I'm seeing it, I think that I'm going to respect Dillian Whyte's toughness and heart and desire for this fight Who I think he's going to fight next? Itauma. I think if it is a decision and it's not just a blowout in the first round, he may get matched up against an opponent in which, could be seen as not a tremendously big step up, like somebody like a Lawrence Okoli, maybe a Richard Riakporhe, maybe a Fabio Wardley, all very good domestic matchups there. If he does, do really well and knock him out well, he'll probably get matched up against somebody like a Zhilei Zhang or a Martin Bakole, perhaps somebody like that, maybe even an Anthony Joshua, but again, I'm not entirely sure if Anthony Joshua will be willing to take that same risk. Moving on now to speak about, from what I believe to be the co-main event of this card, and that is Nick Ball versus Sam Goodman, and that is for the WBA Featherweight World title. And, this is Goodman moving up into the Featherweight division, and that is basically coming off the fact that he's probably knowing that he's not going to get the Inoue fight anymore. He's been very unfortunate not to get the Inoue fight, and things just haven't gone his way. I don't think it's any fault of his own. Like I say, I just don't think that things have gone his way. So I think it is the smart choice for him to move up, because he doesn't want to waste his prime years just waiting around without a world title opportunity. And he kind of knew that if he did move up, then he would get put straight into a world title fight. And so, like I say, I'm not surprised that he has been willing to, step up and fight somebody like Nick Ball, because again, like I say, he's wanting to prove himself, Sam Goodman, and he's, he is a very good fighter. He's coming off a fight against Varka, and that was out in Australia, and that was only 3 months ago. And so, like I say, that was a fight in which was a good contest. I think Goodman shows that he has very good, solid fundamentals and really can, utilize them at a world level to be better than a lot of fighters, who are them gatekeepers. But this is his first fight out of Australia and by far his toughest test. So it will be definitely interesting to see how he fares with somebody so unique as what Nick Ball is. And, Nick Ball is somebody who seemingly just keeps getting better, to be completely honest. I mean, he seems to be only in the big fights though when he's in Riyadh, and he's not been in Riyadh his past couple of fights, but he's fought TJ Doheny and Ronnie Rios recently in Liverpool, and he's not really overlooked them on paper easier opponents. He's still been able to go out there, put on entertaining performances, and it seems like His Excellency is a fan of him because, like I say, he sees the entertainment that he brings. And again, he's on a great run, and I've touched upon this already. He may be, and he probably is, the best British fighter around at the moment, just in what he's achieved. You can look at, Daniel Dubois, but of course he's coming off a loss now, and then you look at other fighters around, and I just don't really see anybody who is at that same level anymore. I mean, Tyson Fury's retired now, and so again, like I say, I think skill-wise, Nick Ball is the best, and from what he's achieved as well, the best British fighter around at the moment. And again, it will just be a great showcase performance, I believe, from him. Perhaps he could be made to chase Goodman around again with the movement and the defense, which is solid of Goodman. He may be forced to chase him around a little bit. Maybe he even gets frustrated and kicks him, like he did against TJ Doheny, which, to be fair, I'm surprised he didn't get punished a bit more for. But I do think that Nick Ball will win via TKO in round 9. Like I say, I think he's going to be able to put on a pretty devastating performance. I think that Goodman, again, like I say, probably does have a good defense, and that is one of his better attributes. Again, just very solid, well-rounded fighter, but I don't think he is going to be able to handle something like a Nick Ball. And when you look at his last performance, Goodman, against something like a Varka, it's him just getting caught way too much. And I think Nick Ball is just going to be able to capitalise upon that. Like I say, hit him way too often. I think he is going to be tough, and he is going to have that heart of an undefeated fighter. But inevitably, Nick Ball TKO late on in round 9 is my prediction. Then we can go on to fight next. I mean, a Ray Vargas again could be a good fight. Again, I'm not entirely sure what's going on with Ray Vargas, if he's retired, because I think he has vacated the belt unless it's gone into champion and recess. But nonetheless, again, if he wants to try and contest for that, maybe. If not, someone like Stephen Fulton, maybe. Bruce Carrington has called him out. That could be a big fight. Carrington, of course, is a Riyadh season ambassador, so that could happen. Mirko Coelho is coming off a big stoppage win in the weekend to, become interim champion, or, stay interim champion, I believe. So yeah, that could be a fight there to be made as well. So there's definitely a few fights there to be made. Carrington is probably the biggest one, bar, Fulton. So again, one of them two, if it's on a Riyadh season show, probably would make sense. Moving on now to the Raymond Ford versus Abraham Nova fight. And, of course, Kukache was meant to be fighting on this card. And I still think, this is a good fight, but I'm not entirely sure if this, without Kakache fighting on the card, is a number one contenders fight. I think that may make it drop down a little bit. I mean, Abraham Nova is still a very good fighter. He hasn't been on the best of runs when you just look at his record with recent losses to Foster and Cortez, but in them fights he was both, they were both very competitive. A lot of people had Nova up over Cortez in that fight, and the fact that it was a unanimous decision, even the commentators themselves believed that Nova had done enough. So, the fact he didn't get a rematch against either Foster, which again was a close split decision as well, where he really, like I say, bought it and made it a really tough contest. The fact he didn't get a rematch in either of them is very unfortunate. He is coming off a win against, a step down in opponent, Abraham Nova, just to get him back in the winning column, but I think he is going to be somebody who is going to make it an entertaining contest. Coming in on short notice, I think that won't, change his game plan, and I think he will still be fighting fit and ready. So again, like I say, this has the makings to be a very entertaining contest for Raymond Ford. He's been somebody who, of course, fought Nick Bull down at the featherweight division, but since moving up into the super featherweight division, he's had a couple fights with gatekeeper world level type fighters on matchroom shows, and again, not really been in the limelight too much as of recent with them fights. He's been fighting on undercards, but he has looked more attacking and actually just really good in my opinion. I think, like I say, he's been dominating, showcasing that he is a real world level type fighter. When he got that fight against Kolmatov, that was a fight in which, I wasn't entirely rating of Foster's of Ford's skills, and I didn't think he, deserved to be a world champion. And obviously, he got that really late knockout, which, I'm surprised he didn't try and order a rematch for, because it was a fight in which Ford was losing. But now, coming up into this division, he's definitely improved, and if he's continuing to be improving, he could make somebody like Nova an easier fight. It's just if he gets drawn into a fight, standing toe to toe with this more aggressive style with Nova, I think that's when he will find problems. But if he stays, putting on the attacking pressure, but with smart attacking pressure, which I have seen from him in his more recent fights, I do think that Raymond Ford will be able to win. I think it will be a unanimous decision. I don't feel like his power looks anything too impressive up at the super featherweight division, but like I say, I think his boxing technique and skill, like I say, in their more recent contests have looked very good. Something that also will be interesting will be if Abraham Nova is allowed to bring his mascot into the ring and into the build-up. That's always a funny one to see in and around on an Abraham Nova fight week. But who Raymond Ford might fight next, of course, that Kakache fight is still there and around, but has Kakache blew his opportunity now to get a fight like a Raymond Ford due to the fact that he could be pulled out injured? Maybe, possibly. I mean, it's definitely not biding well. A lot of people have been saying that he's been ducking Nunez already, Kakache. So if he's, pulling out from injury against Raymond Ford, then I'm sure, the fans aren't going to be appreciating that too much. So they may move Raymond Ford on to the winner of Nunez versus Diaz Velez, or, I know Shaki Foster for the WBC belt. Raymond Ford's talked about fighting for that belt quite often as well. So again, I think there could be a world title right around the corner on a Riyadh season show, most likely, or a big Ring magazine event. I mean, instead. So yeah, like I say, probably big things, especially if he puts on a dominating performance here against Abraham Nova. Moving on now to the final fight in which I'm going to speak about on this card. It is Filip Hrgovic versus David Adeleye for that WBO International Heavyweight title. And I mean, Adeleye in general is somebody who has flipped his career around. I mean, after the Wardley defeat, he was kind of looking a bit down and out. I mean, he got knocked out by Wardley, and even before that, he wasn't really putting on the best of fights. You know, he was headlining these Queensberry shows and, you know, ducking out of purse bids and things like that, which, like I say, didn't seem to, you know, look the best for him, and not really seemingly was getting the big fights and things like that. Then he got that Wardley fight, then he lost, and then he had to try and rebuild his way back. And now, I think, like I say, he's fully flipped his career around. He's looking like a more scarier puncher than ever. And now he's got an opportunity to really bump himself up the world rankings. And it is, you know, interesting to see that he's not forced to have the rematch with TKV. Of course, that fight was a fight in which you could argue that David Adeleye was losing and was getting maybe outboxed a little bit with the awkward jab, the kind of up jab of TKV. But, you know, of course, the ref got involved, moved the hand out of the way and told TKV to break. Then Adeleye caught him with a shot, knocked him down. Then his legs weren't under him for the remainder of the fight. And so, you know, he's been fortunate to get moved on to this fight, which really, like I say, can elevate his career and really push him away from that kind of British scene and into a world scene. And again, you know, it seems like he's been kind of given a favour there, to be completely honest, because he could be in and around the British level for quite a while still, because there is still a few names who are floating around who are, you know, wanting to fight him at that level. You know, a Fraser Clark is one of them, for example. But like I say, he's kind of been put onto perhaps a world level scene now, a Fringe world level scene, with the likes of a Wardley and an Itauma, who also, like I say, is all taking a move up at this same time from the British kind of level to that next kind of step in their career. And I mean, he's in and against Hrgovic, who's coming off a win against Joe Joyce, and I mean, it was a bit of a scrappy contest. I mean, I've never really been that impressed from anything that Hrgovic has done in the professional game, especially his, you know, world levels and generally just kind of big fights on big stages. I mean, he didn't look the best against a Joe Joyce, who did look a little bit better than some of his prior performances, but still looked sloppy and messy and not really that good. And again, like I say, Hrgovic kept looking switched off at times, and yeah, inevitably it was a performance in which I feel like he could have won a bit more convincingly, because there was times where he did showcase that he was boxing well and did look good, and he was fighting off the back foot well with good straight shots and was looking quite accurate. But then there was times in which he was just getting caught a lot and slugging it out quite a lot, and again, you know, that just didn't really impress me at all. And I mean, they're both fighters coming into this that do have big egos, and again, could be both made to get frustrated. I mean, if Hrgovic gets behind his jab and can keep him mid-range and use them straight shots, he could perhaps outbox Adeleye, and that's when Adeleye could get frustrated, and he can get, you know, if he gets tied up as well, Adeleye, he gets frustrated and inevitably can, you know, load up on his punches a bit too much. But I do believe that David Adeleye will win via TKO in round 8. I think, like I say, Hrgovic just switches off way too much. I think Adeleye, with that more power in him, if he gets frustrated a little bit, it probably won't be a problem. I think, if anything, that will fuel him to be able to land inevitably that one big shot in which he needs. And I do think that is all realistically. He needs one big shot, and then I think he could get a knockout. I'm going to give him the credit to say, you know, Hrgovic the credit to say that it won't be until round 8, like I say, into the bit of the later part of the fight. It could be earlier, but I do still believe that Adeleye will be able to win via stoppage. Then who he can go on to fight next? I mean, a couple of names that I've already spoke about for, you know, Itauma, depending on how he does. But David Adeleye could also fight in a Coley or in a Reactpor. Obviously, it seemed like he was meant to fight, you know, perhaps a TKV, but like I say, that seemingly kind of moved on a bit now. So if it could put him into, like I say, that world level or that Fringe world level, which I think a Coley and Reactpor are at the moment. So either them two, an FA Ajagba even doesn't have a fight at the moment, and it does seem like they're trying to not make the Ajagba Bacoli rematch. So that could be a good fight there to be made, which is a bit of an underrated contest as well. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you did, like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.